Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing 4 book reviews consisting of Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, The Last Summer by Judith Kinghorn, and The Rival Queens by Nancy Goldstone. Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton tells the story of Amani Alhiza, a young girl living day by day in the desert nation of Miraji, where mythical beasts roam and the jinn perform magic. As a woman, Amani doesn't have many prospects in life, but one day at a shooting contest, she meets a mysterious foreigner named Jinn, who provides her with a means of escape. Amani finds herself on the run from soldiers and learns of a rebellion involving a prince trying to dethrone his father. So, first off, I won this ARC copy on Goodreads, so thank you very much, Goodreads. I was really torn about my rating for this book, you guys, because part of me wanted to give the book 4 stars, but I ultimately went with 3 stars based off of the Goodreads rating system. So yeah, 3 stars for this. I really did enjoy this though. I really liked it. A very unique and interesting concept. I say this all the time when I'm reviewing fantasy books, especially if a fantasy book is doing something else. You know, the typical thing that fantasy writers tend to do, they tend to have a medieval influence in their fantasy. So here with Rebel of the Sands, Alwyn Hamilton, she doesn't go the traditional medieval route. She takes her influences from more of the Middle East, more influences from that and that culture, which I really liked and appreciated. So this is the debut novel in the series. It's definitely not perfect. It definitely has its problems. But I tell you what, bravo though. Alwyn Hamilton, a great start though. I think there is definitely some great promise here in the future for not only her as a writer, but just for this series in general. There is some pretty good world building in this series overall. The world building can get a little overwhelming, not gonna lie. It definitely does get a little overwhelming on occasion, because sometimes I found myself having to reread a paragraph in order to fully comprehend what I just read. So not only do you have the complicated world building, but you also have a lot of characters introduced to you at the start, even if a lot of those characters you don't physically meet firsthand just yet. They're more characters that you meet later in the book, or you're going to meet them later in the series, I suppose. But you quickly get introduced to the idea that this nation called Miraji, they're ruled by a sultan. The thing is, this sultan has like dozens of children. So you have that in the background as well, that you got to kind of keep memorized. And something else I would have liked about this book, I wish there had been a map, because this is just an ARC copy, like I said, and there's not a map in here. So I don't know if maybe the finished copy happens to have a map. I'll have to go look that up, but if it doesn't have a map, it definitely needs one. Because not only are a lot of character names thrown at you, but a lot of places that are within this world are thrown at you too, and I would have liked a visual of where exactly Amani is in respect to where all these other locations are. The book does start off really good. I actually think the whole start of this book, maybe the first half or so, probably the strongest by Alwyn Hamilton as far as setting up the world and the characters. But then it is literally about halfway through this book that I do feel like a lot of events happened really quickly, a lot of information was thrown at you quickly, and I kind of feel like this book needed an additional 100 pages or something. That would have been nice. And yeah, tons and tons of characters introduced right at the end of this book, you guys. Kind of hard to keep them all straight and keep track of them. A lot of these people have kind of special gifts and powers, which you gotta kind of keep memorized in the back of your head as well. So that's kind of another reason why I say that I wish this had been a little bit longer to kind of flesh out those characters, but hopefully, you know, book 2 in this series will continue to explore those characters, flesh them out. And I also felt like the ending of this book was rather abrupt. I flipped the final page and then I was like, wait, what? That's it? No! It kind of just ends ends. Like, okay, now you gotta move on to book 2, but the thing is, don't have book 2 yet. I think this series, once all the books come out, I have a feeling this series will benefit from just reading straight through without any breaks or interruptions. And going back to the characters very quickly, I did find myself really liking these characters. I especially really liked Amani and, you know, her plight and her situation and the things that she represented within the story. She definitely has spunk and personality and determination, and she knows how to use a gun. I love that. I love a leading lady who knows how to properly use a gun because I certainly don't know how to use one, and I love when a female just is badass with a gun. And then the main hero in this book that travels alongside Amani, Jin, he's a mysterious stranger, and that's kind of all I can tell you because he is definitely a very spoiler-filled character. But the thing with Jin, once you do get halfway through the story, I think it is very, very obvious who he is. And that's all I'll say. But yeah, I definitely picked up fairly immediately what his secret was. And I do think some of the characters, there are some cliches in here. I mean, it is young adult after all. I mean, that's kind of what you get with young adult. You get a lot of cliches. It's to be expected. So you do have some characters that do have some cliches. And then another sort of frustrating thing about this book, knowing me, I love a good villain, you guys, but the thing is, you don't really have a villain in this book, like one leading villain, because I think what you're going to get with books 2 and 3, that's when the primary villain is going to come out. Because what you get in this book are lower level secondary villains, essentially. So yeah, I highly recommend this book if you want to try out a new fantasy series. Like I said, this sounds very promising. It also has a unique concept, set in a unique world. So if that sounds up your alley, then I highly recommend it. In Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, we follow Catherine Morland, a young girl obsessed with Gothic literature, and her adventures in Bath, where she first encounters the handsome Mr. Tilney. Catherine learns the hard way that life isn't like the books she reads, and that those closest to you can deliver the biggest betrayals. You guys, I don't think I'm having very much luck with Jane Austen lately. The thing is, I love Pride and Prejudice, and I love Sense and Sensibility, but last year, I think it was, I read Persuasion. I did not like Persuasion. I was very disappointed. Persuasion was so boring. So I picked up Northanger Abbey next, you know, thinking that I would like this, just judging from the premise of the story and that it's a satire, essentially, on Gothic literature. I was like, ooh, this sounds right up my alley. I think I'm really going to love this. I did not like this book either, you guys. But that being said, I definitely did prefer this over Persuasion, but not by much. So just to start off with some of the positives of this book, I did really like the leading protagonist, Catherine Morland. I just got the biggest kick out of her. I definitely really fell in love with her character, and she's just this silly girl. She has an obsession with Gothic literature, which I almost feel like I can relate to on some level. And yeah, she just thinks that her life and everything around her is part of like a Gothic novel or something. So yeah, she has a very over-imaginative brain, essentially. She has wild and crazy thoughts and over-analyzes and overthinks certain situations. But despite her having an over-imaginative brain and how she views the world, she's also a very sweet and kind character. Looks out for those around her. I really liked her relationship with Mr. Tilney. But her being so sweet and kind, I think, is her biggest character flaw, because people kind of abuse her kindness, and she hands out her trust too easily, and that comes back to backstab her in certain situations that play out throughout this novel. So yeah, as far as characters go, I really loved Catherine. I really found Isabella one of the most fascinating characters in this book, to be honest. And oh my god, I loved to hate Isabella's brother, John. And you know what? People always hate on Mr. Wickham from Pride and Prejudice. But you know, the thing about Mr. Wickham in Pride and Prejudice is that on the surface, he's very charming and charismatic, and you kind of like him at the beginning. But yeah, John in this book, John, he is definitely not Mr. Wickham at all. You definitely just hate him immediately. He's just straight up a very vain and arrogant ass. And then I'm not sure how I feel about Catherine's love interest in this book, Mr. Tilney. He quite honestly, he wasn't in this book enough for me to form an opinion of him. I did like him. There was nothing wrong with him, but I don't know, compared to like Mr. Darcy or something, you know, Mr. Tilney, I just didn't really have much to think about for him, or even say, really. And like I said, this book is a huge satire on Gothic literature, just a really clever idea from Jane Austen, really playing with those concepts that you see often in Gothic literature. If you've read enough Gothic literature, you'll be able to pick up on those things very, very quickly and easily in this book. And those were some of my favorite parts of this book. When Catherine did finally get to Northanger Abbey, you guys. By the way, Northanger Abbey, it's the title of this book, but Catherine doesn't even get to Northanger Abbey until the last 25% of this book, which was very frustrating. And literally, that last 25% was my favorite parts of this book. But yeah, I loved when Catherine did finally get to Northanger Abbey. Because of her obsession and her love of Gothic literature, just every little thing that she sees, her mind starts whirling around like, oh my god, there's a dark, deep secret that's lurking here in Northanger Abbey. And yeah, she gets some big shocks. But yeah, overall, I was pretty disappointed in this book, you guys. Like I said, the last 25% was probably the best parts of this book. But yeah, leading up to that, I was just really bored on occasion. I just kept waiting for the action to go somewhere. It often kind of just felt a little repetitive. But like I said, better than Persuasion in my opinion. The Last Summer by Judith Kinghorn takes place the summer of 1914 and follows Clarissa Granville, who lives with her parents and 3 brothers at Denning Park, an old English country house where she lives a life of luxury and parties, not knowing that war is just around the corner. This is the last summer before the war, and Clarissa falls in love with Tom, the son of the housekeeper. Not only do their social statuses keep them apart, but so too does the war, and Tom and Clarissa are determined to stay with each other through the ups and downs of a rapidly changing society. You know, it's quite refreshing to read a book taking place in World War I, because I tend to read a lot of World War II historical fiction, so whenever I can get my hands on something that takes place during World War I always look forward to it, because World War I, whew, such turmoil, you guys. Just the whole nature of that war, just so horrible and really rough. And the thing is, it's World War I that really gets the world to start viewing things differently, you know, because prior to World War I, what you have is all these monarchies, and you have the aristocracy and whatnot. You have all these rich, fancy people. And you know, the thing about World War I is the fact that it made people listen. You know, it made people finally look and view the world differently, because people, when World War I happened, and then after World War I, that's when people really started realizing, hey, social status is no longer relevant. You know, we shouldn't be placing ourselves in these societal roles anymore. World War I essentially forced people to become modern, if you will. And that's part of the tragedy and sadness when you read a book set during World War I, because of the changing viewpoints of the world and social status no longer being relevant anymore. And yeah, the oldness and tradition of days past are slowly disappearing and vanishing. I do have some conflicted feelings about this book, but overall I did really enjoy this book. I gave it 3 stars. Judith Kinghorn definitely has a way with writing, that's for sure. She's very descriptive. I definitely felt immersed into the time period. But what's so frustrating about this book is how depressing it is, you guys. If you're a mood reader, You definitely need to be in the mood to read this book because it definitely gets pretty dark and pretty tragic on occasion. There's not too much light or joy in it. And when I read a book, I like a fine balance of tragedy and humor, and this book definitely didn't have a good balance of that. It was more heavy on the tragedy and drama. And the thing is, because there is so much tragedy and drama, it can get a little too heavy, and it often kind of felt a little monotonous sometimes, like, oh my god, we're rehashing this again. But Judith Kinghorn, she does a fantastic job setting up this book before you do get to the drama and tragedy of World War I, because this book, it's called The Last Summer. It literally takes place that last summer before the start of the war, and we see Clarissa and her family before everything happens, and them having these luxurious parties and inviting people over and having a good time. And the important thing here, Clarissa's whole life is pre-planned. She has no say in her future. Everything is pre-planned, predestined. She's going to live like this, and she's going to continue to have this luxurious lifestyle, and she's going to meet a man who meets her social expectations and this and that. So then you have this great dynamic come into play when she meets with Tom, who is the son of their housekeeper, and the two of them quickly form this attachment to one another when they shouldn't have this attachment because of their very different social statuses. But then, oh boy, here comes the start of the war, and all of that pre-planning and predestination that was designed for Clarissa, that all comes crumbling down, and life is not so simple as it used to be. The book has a lot of intricate moving pieces. There's a lot of things being interwoven within the story that you got to pay attention to because they all kind of collide with one another by the end of the book. And just to talk about Clarissa very quickly, Clarissa's one of those frustrating heroines because sometimes you like her, but then sometimes you really, really hate her. And a lot of times I found myself wanting to reach through the page and like strangle her and be like, girl, knock it off. Make some better choices and decisions. But the thing is, all of the mistakes that Clarissa makes in this novel, I mean, that's part of the novel. It's part of her character growth and what she discovers about herself by the end and what she discovers about this new world. So yeah, I highly recommend this book if you like World War I historical fiction. And hey, if you love Downton Abbey, this is definitely kind of like Downton Abbey, especially with all the drama. Set in Renaissance France, The Rival Queens by Nancy Goldstone tells the volatile relationship between Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, and her daughter Marguerite de Valois, Queen of Navarre. Catherine was a ruthless strategist. Marguerite was a passionate advocate. This relationship was put to the ultimate test when Catherine forced her Catholic daughter to marry her Protestant cousin, and the wedding is used as a ruse to brutally murder their Protestant rivals. The Rival Queens is a story of family, court politics, ambition, and murder, with two women stuck in a battle to outwit the other and prove their power. First off, I won this ARC copy on Goodreads, so thank you very much, Goodreads. So to start off with, I guess it should be noted, I gave this book 2 stars on Goodreads, but the thing is, it's important for me to stress that maybe this book just wasn't for me. I think if you are someone very familiar with this time period, you know, if you know a lot about Renaissance France, if you know a lot about the de' Medici family and the Valois and whatnot, yeah, I think you will definitely have an easier time getting into this book and appreciating it. Because the thing is, this is not a bad book, despite me giving it 2 stars. The 2 stars is mostly just a personal thing, because of me personally, I am not entirely familiar with this time in history. I am more in the know with the English side of history during this era. So yeah, I found myself getting pretty bored throughout this book, not gonna lie. Once again, just a personal thing because I'm not familiar with the time period. I just found myself getting really bored, and the only times, maybe this is shameful for me to say, the only times I would perk up reading this book would be when someone would be getting murdered. Whenever there was these plots and intrigues and the murders, you know, all the planning and whatnot, and then once the murders would actually happen, then I'd be like, oh, this is exciting stuff. And it's such a shame that I was bored with this book, you guys, because Nancy Goldstone, I mean, she clearly did her research. You know, it's wonderfully written. And yet these are two of the most interesting women of the time period, Catherine de Medici and her daughter Margaret de Valois. I mean, wow, two incredibly compelling women. And not only that, because Nancy Goldstone even mentions in this book that this era was the era of highly intelligent women that had never happened before. Because not only do you have Catherine de Medici and Margaret de Valois, you also have Queen Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots, who kind of are talked about quite a bit in this book as well. So like I said, I'm more familiar with the English side. I know a lot more with Mary Queen of Scots and Queen Elizabeth I. And my only experience with Catherine de Medici comes from the CW show Reign, because even though that show is mostly focused on Mary Queen of Scots, Catherine de Medici has a huge role in that show. She's just as important. So that's where my interest and fascination came in, because I love Catherine de Medici on that show. So that's mostly why I signed up to win this book. But oh man, Catherine de Medici, what a character, what a woman. She was a ruthless leader back in the day, truly ruthless. She did just about anything that she could to protect not only herself, but to protect her family as well and her children, and make sure her children came out on top. So yeah, I guess my boredom with this book came into play a lot with all these various different historical figures that would interact with Marguerite and Catherine de Medici. Just so many people I wasn't familiar with at all, and so many people with the same exact name, lots of Henrys, lots of Francises, lots of Dukes of Guise, just so many, just sitting looking at my notes, lots of people with so many similar names, it wasn't even funny. But Nancy Goldstone, she does attempt to really help you with those similar names, you know, she helps you quickly kind of figure out, okay, this is this Francis, and then this is this Francis. So yeah, you're kind of momentarily confused, but Nancy Goldstone kind of helps you out a little bit. So overall, I recommend this book for people who are far more in the know with Renaissance France, who know a lot more about Catherine de Medici and all the shenanigans she got up to, because this book just really wasn't for me, quite honestly. I think this was a little too in-depth. I need to start somewhere a little bit more basic and easier and simpler, and then maybe pick this book back up and reread it. So that's it for these book reviews. I hope you guys enjoyed. In the comments below, have you guys read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for these book reviews. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you liked this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.